we'll all take chances to ask questions. So.
Okay, super.
Please.
Well, let me start. My name is James Watkins. I live in Redmond. Have lived in Redmond in my current house for about 12 years now. Was born in Tokyo, grew up in the military, lived in Tokyo pretty much till I was 12 at Tachikawa Air Force Base. And we did brief stints at Wright-Patterson and some of the other ones. My dad was started off his service in the his career in the service as an enlisted guy, then he was a fighter pilot and then a lawyer, and he had a great career. So I come from a military family. My grandfather's buried at Arlington, about 10 yards from my dad. My mom was a code breaker in World War II. Military is something I take quite seriously. I started my career in Alaska as a mechanic. I then went to George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where I earned an MBA, International Business and Finance. The school that I went to was about 4 blocks from the White House. It was George Washington University. And it was a great place to go to school because it had exposure to so many really interesting things going on around it. I had a chance to do internships at the IMF and the World Bank and a bunch of other government agencies, Commodities Futures Trading Commission, places like that. The fellowship that I got to go to graduate school required me to do 4 years. They asked me to do 4 years of government service. I did that at the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. At the tail end of the previous S&L crisis, this was during the first Bush administration, and then I was there for 2 or 3 years of the first Bill Clinton term. So I've had the opportunity to work with both Republican and Democrat administrations, which is, I think, something you'll see throughout my career. I'm a pretty bipartisan guy, pretty independent guy, as we talk through some of these issues. At the FDIC, I worked at the Office of Budget and Corporate Planning for the chairman, and we figured out that you can actually cut government spending while maintaining service levels, the proper number of examinations and that kind of thing. And that's kind of stuck with me. I'm the only guy running that has the experience of cutting spending at a federal agency. I did my 4 years there, decided government was not what I wanted to do for a career. Went into the private sector and worked primarily with technology companies, working with small businesses. So I did a lot of work with small business startups, very entrepreneurial guys, mostly in and around the Microsoft system with Microsoft technology. So I've been in and around Microsoft for the last 15 or so, 16 years. Most recently I was at Microsoft as an employee for about 5.5 years, running an incubation business within Microsoft, working with small business retailers. And I had 50,000 customers. I've been to every state in the country working with retailers, working with small businesses, with thousands of them, trying to help them grow their businesses, trying to help them figure out how to hire, how to compete with in many cases, the bigger stores, the bigger businesses, and how to thrive. I left Microsoft about, I guess, a year and a half ago, and since then have been doing a little bit of consulting while I've been running for Congress. Again, working with small businesses. I talk with about 20 or 30 small businesses a week, a lot of them in the district, but all across the country, and that's going to pepper a lot of the answers that I have. I'm running for office because I came to the realization about a year and a half ago, not too long after I left Microsoft, that we simply can't afford the government that we have. Our government's making some stunningly bad decisions, and they're putting our country at risk. There's a website called usdebtclock.org, and you look at that site and it's frightening. Every citizen of the United States now owes $44,000 of direct debt of the United States. And when you run some calculations, it works out to be about $1 million for every taxpayer for the unfunded mandates and the debt and so forth. And that's the world that my kids are kind of growing up in. And we started off in doing tea parties in about April of 2009 with my wife, just a local group, 20 or 30 people waving signs on the street corner. My sign said, "I can't afford my government." And we did that for a while, and that was fun, but we realized pretty quick that waving signs on a street corner is not the most effective thing to do. And then we talked about how we could have an impact, and we decided that it was for me to run for office.
Thank you. Well, let's talk about your opponents, some of the things that he brought up. We'll start with this, because there were a few things that he said in the interview Monday that I wanted to give you a chance to respond to. One of them was that you Well, let me just ask your stance on the Wall Street reform, those packages that have happened. That was one thing that he said, you two disagree on, we got his perspective on it, I'd like to hear yours.
Right, so he's going to hit me on the Wall Street reform. He's saying I want to privatize Social Security. There's a bunch of other ones that I hear when we do these candidate forums. The problem with the Wall Street reform that they passed is it didn't address any of the problems that we had that caused this in the first place. The Wall Street reform was written by the senator and the congressman who are most responsible for the crisis, Barney Frank and Chris Dodd. And in the reform bill, they make the regulation of the financial industry much more bureaucratic. They didn't do anything to address the underlying cause of the mortgage problem. They didn't do anything to address Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And we currently have an exposure to Fannie and Freddie of $1 trillion, and they did nothing to address that. So I think Mr. Inslee and I have a huge difference of opinion there. Mr. Inslee was actively arguing to prevent President Bush from re-regulating Fannie and Freddie. And in fact, he sent a letter, and I believe I have it here, in 2004 to President Bush, arguing against using safety and soundness as lending criteria. And so, yeah, I'd say that Mr. Inslee and I have a huge difference of opinion.
What is the need for regulation on Wall Street now? I do agree that there's some protections that are certainly needed, and there has to be something.
Absolutely. Look, right now we have 7 regulatory agencies, and I was at the FDIC for 4 years. I'm very aware of what these guys are supposed to be doing. We have 7 regulatory agencies right now, and if these guys had done their job, then we wouldn't be in the position that we are today. I don't think that creating another regulatory agency is the way to go.
Well, should there be reform done in terms of what they're watching? I mean, how do we prevent this from happening again then? Isn't that what the intent of this bill is?
I think the first thing we need to do is we need to address the underlying instruments that created this whole thing, which was these bad mortgage loans, and then the derivatives flew out of those. And I think that the regulators have the tools if the regulators would have been more diligent in their work. You know, we had at the SEC, for example, the guys that are supposed to be watching a lot of these instruments. 33 of their top officers were watching porn at work. It was a big scandal, during this thing. We need these people to be doing their jobs. And having a financial reform bill that doesn't address the underlying problems is just sort of skimming over the problem and not really addressing it.
So you're saying basically if they would have been doing their jobs, this wouldn't have happened?
I think if they had had appropriate oversight, yeah, absolutely this wouldn't have happened.
So oversight is part of your reform?
Oh, yeah, sure. And having a Congress that's going to hold these guys accountable. We had a Congress that was actively preventing the re-regulation of Fannie and Freddie to prevent these kind of bad mortgages. You know, how can we justify as a country taking the exposure for mortgage loans that are being made without judging the capacity of the borrowers to repay?
So you mentioned that
liars loans, no down loans, and all
the
that.
exposure to Freddie and Fannie,
Mm-hmm.
and what is it specifically you would do to limit that exposure for us?
Well, I think that we need to put an emphasis on safety and soundness in mortgage loans. We need to have that be the first priority to make sure that the people that are borrowing it can actually repay the loans. We have the liars loans, no down loans, all those kinds of things. I think we need to do that
So is that a role of government?
It was certainly a role of government to tell them that that's the kind of loans that they had to make in the first place as a result of the Community Reinvestment Act. And I think that that does need to be changed, you bet. And then with the rest of it, we have things that the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, for example, which has in the past regulated instruments that are very near derivatives, can certainly be given the authority to regulate more derivatives and be on top of those contracts.
As someone who worked at the FDIC, but you saw how it works on the inside there, and you saw how those things work. And if I overstep, tell me. Part of you said you were campaigning with the Tea Party movement, and kind of some of that.
The Tea Party movement, I mean, the way that works is you've got little local groups. There is no movement.
Right, so
there's nobody that's, certainly there's nobody that's writing me checks from the Tea Party.
No, I don't mean to insinuate like that. But it seems like one of the big cries that comes up in a lot of the little groups is that there's too much regulation over these things, and now this Wall Street reform is just another layer of that, is another example of that. But at the same time, you've seen this stuff from the inside, and so I would guess that you still understand the importance and where that should land. Maybe that's trying to get at what your opinion on that.
Let me try this maybe a different way. You know, as I've been running for this office, I've been doing this pretty much full-time for just under a year now. And I've talked to people all over the district, and what people, I think, want is not no government regulation. They want good government, and they want a government that's going to be efficient, and they want a government that's going to be effective. And unfortunately, the government that we have now simply isn't working. It doesn't matter really pretty much which part of the government you look at, we just have problems everywhere. And the government appears to be broken. And I think that we want our government to be efficient, be effective, be productive. When I was at the FDIC under the first Clinton administration, that's, I guess, a little before most of your guys' time, Al Gore was leading the Reinventing Government. Do you guys remember that? Mm-hmm. And that was, I think, tremendously successful, and that led directly to the first 2 years of budget surpluses that we've had in my lifetime. And that's the kind of thing I think we need to get back to in the government, is having a government that is really working, really cares about what the results are that we get for the dollars that we put in.
One of those things, maybe I'll just use that as a segue. Mr. Inslee talked about his confidence in the stimulus. He kind of went through his recent votes for us and said, I didn't vote for this and I stand by that. I did vote for this and I stand by that. And that was one that he wanted to point out and stand by. What's your opinion of how that, how it evolved, how it was approved, and do you think it worked?
The stimulus?
Yes.
The $862 billion stimulus?
Correct.
I think it's pretty clear that the $862 billion stimulus did not work. We have got, we are in the, I think, 14th month of unemployment over 9.5%. And in that stimulus, we were pretty much guaranteed that it was going to stop at 8%. Unemployment was going to be held at 8%. And the money that was put out in the stimulus went to stimulate government for the most part for a single year. And the bulk of that money spent. There was, President Obama just was on the news, was it today, saying that, gee, I found out there was no such thing as a shovel-ready project. Well, it's kind of a little late. Because that money is spent and gone, and the actual true cost of that stimulus, depending on the analysis that you read, is going to be $2.7 trillion over a course of years, because it actually started and added to some government programs that are going to be continuing. And so, no, I don't think that stimulus worked. And I think it's pretty clear when you listen to the statements of President Obama and other folks that it didn't work. That was a very bad vote. It was a vote, I think, to reward certain special interest groups, and I don't think it was in the interest of the United States. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't have done some kind of stimulus at that time, but the stimulus we should have done at that time should have been oriented towards actually the real economy and driving real jobs. And we could have had a tax holiday for 2 years for all of our payroll taxes, which would have stimulated employment. We could have had all sorts of research and development grants. We could have done all sorts of things that would have stimulated the economy and actually grown it, as opposed to simply frittering away $862 billion.
A tax holiday, there would have been also associated cuts with something like that, because there's all sorts of revenue that would no longer be there.
We spent $862 million, or will spend $862 million, whether it's a tax holiday or whether it's a direct giveaway. I mean, there's all sorts
of... That's the way you would. Along those lines, right now, Congress is putting off a decision as far as extending those Bush-era tax cuts, and what the delegation from our state, at least, is saying that they're searching for kind of a middle ground, that they would still stay in place for some and not for the others. If you're elected,
yeah,
they may make a decision before anyone.
Right. And it depends on who in our delegation you're talking to. I mean, if you're talking to Mr. Inslee and Mr. Dix, you're going to get one side of that. If you're talking to Reichert or...
Sorry, I meant the one that represents Kitsap County.
Okay.
So that's who I was talking about.
Sure. First of all, let me say that the tax scheme that we've had in place now for 10 years. And so we're not talking about a tax cut, we're talking about a tax increase, because this has been the budget or the tax scheme for 10 years. And so when you're looking, we are right now in the middle of a really bad recession. And if you guys look at the sort of GDP, and that's been declining quarter over quarter, the rate of growth in the economy, unemployment is climbing. We're clearly looking, to me at least, like we're going into another bad part of the economy. If we reinstitute those tax hikes, if we raise taxes at this point in our recovery, such as it is, we will, again, looking at different analysis, we can see the GDP drop by as much as 2.5 points, depending on how much of that you take out. And we cannot afford that right now. As a country, we cannot afford to have another 2.5 points taken out. That's going to put us right back into recession. and a deep recession at that. So this is the wrong time to raise taxes. You simply don't raise taxes in the middle of a recession.
When you say that you're working with small businesses a lot, these would be people who you think would be affected by, because I mean, if the plan is proposed as very, over $400,000
Well,
a year is what they're saying.
it's $200,000.
$400,000 for a couple.
Yeah, 400 if there's a couple, but it's 200,000 for an individual, so let's not.
Do you feel that most of who your constituent business would be do fall into that, and so they are touched by
I
it?
think
Or
there's- I think
are there
there's-
smaller businesses who maybe would do better not having to go through kind of the service cuts and the other things that you could say would be a trade-off here?
What kind of service cuts are you saying?
Well,
are gonna happen?
there's going to be, the way it's portrayed is that there's a $700 billion that could come in revenue if those are implemented at a certain level. That
Over how
would
many years?
be made up somewhere.
Over 10 years?
Yeah. That's going to be made up somewhere, and you would likely see fewer services available to people. And so do you feel that a small business, what are you hearing back from?
So
I guess that's
let me say a couple of things. The first thing is that works out to be $70 billion a year. This Congress has not blinked at spending $70 billion in an afternoon. And so I think that's a specious argument, first of all. Second thing is for the businesses, the bulk of the people that are in that $200,000 and above tax bracket for individuals are going to be subchapter S filers. And these are the guys that have successful small businesses. These are the guys that are normally driving the economy. And I think that Mr. Inslee does not understand how these small businesses operate and how they think about their businesses. And if you've got a guy that has a small business and he's going to be jumped into a higher tax rate, they're going to be very unsure about how to invest. They're going to not be working as hard to grow their business. I don't know how many businesses you guys talk to or even how your own organization is structured. But right now I can tell you that small businesses are not hiring. They're not investing. And what they're doing right now is they're pulling as much money as they possibly can out of their businesses because they don't know what's going to happen with taxes except they assume it's going to jump. And in a normal recovery, now we're supposed to be in a recovery now for some period of time. In a normal recovery, small businesses are driving 2 out of 3 new jobs in the economy. 70% of all the new jobs are coming from small businesses. Where are those jobs today? They're not happening because the small businesses, our Congress not only didn't do a budget this year, but they didn't vote on the taxes. So we have no idea what our taxes are going to be in 2 months. Small businesses don't know what their capital gains tax is going to be. They don't know what their death tax is going to be. They don't know anything about what the economic climate of their companies are going to be. And so they're sitting on their hands. And if we had time, I could give you a half dozen examples of companies across the country and right here in Kitsap County.
But
they're
also,
pulling money out.
but also the banks are sitting on their money too. They're not lending to small business right now.
That's
So what
the other
is
part
the
of
answer to
problem.
that? I mean, if we get this economy moving, to get it moving, to create the jobs, that's got to loosen up.
Yeah. There's a couple things with the banks not lending. You have one group of businesses, in my experience, that have dough. They've been successful. They're sitting on some capital, and they're not reinvesting it in their business. You have other guys that are trying to figure out how to hang on, and they're spending their own money in the business, and they're trying to get lending or lend loans for working capital or so forth. I was talking to a business out in Redmond. It's a very simple business. It's a rental business. The guy has free cash flow of $40,000 a month, and it took him 6 months to get a $125,000 loan. And that's what we're seeing. I think to figure out why the banks aren't lending, you need to look at the current banking regulations. They've jacked up the reserve requirements on the banks, particularly for business loans, and so they're de-incentivizing the financial institutions from doing that, particularly at the community banking level. The community banks have just been hit hard. Here in Kitsap County, we've lost a number of banks. I think it's been 11 in the district in the last year. And it's primarily from having these reserve requirements jacked up due to the small business loans. So they're really reluctant now to lend to small businesses. I believe that we should reinvigorate the SBA, which has got the loan guarantee programs that have been very successful. And that's been a program that I've been involved in tangentially in the past. And I think that's something that could really help going forward. And I think we need to look at the reserve requirements that have been jacked up for these small institutions. That's another thing in the Wall Street reform. The bulk of those regulations were sort of institutionalizing too big to fail and penalizing the community banks. And it was not putting back that barrier that we need between Wall Street and Main Street for the community banks. because it's the community banks that are lending to the small businesses. It's not the Bank of America's, it's not the you know, those kinds of banks.
What do you see, in addition to the tax issue and this lending issue, what do you see as driving the Western Washington economy over the next decade, and how do you separate yourself from Jay Inslee as far as how you'll address that?
Well, I think that the factor that I see driving the economy in Western Washington is the entrepreneur, is the small business entrepreneur. And small businesses are sort of 500 employees and below. That's the traditional definition of a small business. So some of these are pretty sizable. We have a wonderfully inventive community just all across this district. Guys that are inventing, guys that are doing new and interesting things. I was at a reception here, a dinner, I guess it was 2 nights ago, with a guy who had a very successful maritime business, and he's living over on Bainbridge Island now, and he created an internet business, taking advantage of his maritime experience, and it's now thriving and has a bunch of employees. It's that kind of stuff that's going to drive the economy here. We have been blessed in this area with entrepreneurs. You know, we had Boeing, which was the initial high-tech startup. We've had Microsoft, we've had Starbucks, Amazon, Nordstrom, and a whole bunch of other smaller ones that most people haven't heard of, places like Vulcan, which is just outside the district in Bellevue. And those are the things I think that are going to drive our economy here. The other thing that I am really, that I really want to address is the idea of basic manufacturing, actually making stuff in the United States. We have lost that, and we have exported so much of our manufacturing outside this country. There's a number of different cycles in a business. You've got the inventive entrepreneurs who are figuring out how to do something, and then you've got what they call the scale-up phase. And the scale-up phase is when you're building manufacturing capacity, when you're getting the critical mass that you need to make it into a business that's sustainable. And right now, most of that scale-up is taking place in China and overseas. And we've got to figure out a way to bring that back to the United States. And the bulk of that, I think, is going to be regulatory. There was just a speech that was given by the CEO of Intel, and he was talking about building his new high-tech factory. It's a multi-billion-dollar factory, and he found out that it was going to be 25% more to put it in the United States. That wasn't because of salaries. It's not like we're overpaid. We have the most productive workforce in the world. The problem was the red tape. He had to get 10 permits on the same thing from different government agencies, on and on and on, and it jacked up his price 25%. So he found it easier to do it outside the United States. I was talking to a guy in Linwood, wanted to do, again, a basic kind of a light manufacturing deal. He found that it was easier for him, and this is a guy in Linwood with no international experience, to open a new facility in China. It was easier to do it in China than it was in Linwood, and those are the kind of things we need to fix. Because we have to make stuff in the United States. We just can't all sit around and think good thoughts and be smart people.
Now, your opponent has already started to address these issues, or this is what he's running on, as far as the community banking and trying to get at that, and also some of the green technology type stuff. Sure. It seems like that's what he was telling us a lot about. Sure. What would we expect from you?
So let me talk a little bit about that. You know, Mr. Inslee talks about a lot of things that he's trying to do, but I think we need to separate good intentions from actual results. And with Mr. Inslee, you've got a lot of good intentions. I've been doing these candidate forums, and he's been mischaracterizing me and doing all these demagoguing kinds of things. We need to focus on the actual results of these things. If you're talking about the community, sort of the bank stimulus, the $30 billion, if you guys look at that carefully, it's like a mini TARP. For the community banks to participate in that, are you aware that they have to give up stock to the federal government, and they have to let the federal government have a say in their business?
Didn't know that.
The banks are not real thrilled about that. And there's a provision in that again requires them not to look so much at safety and soundness as other factors in their lending. And there's a lot of talk amongst the small business bankers that they're not real thrilled about that. They could have done a different program, and they could have reinvigorated the SBA. They could have increased the SBA's lending limits. They could have made other monies available to the small businesses if they didn't want to get the stock from the banks and have some kind of other control that maybe they're not, I think the federal government shouldn't have in these small business banks. So that's that program. And that was $30 billion. It was nothing more than an election year kind of a thing that they're trying to do. The other thing in terms of the green jobs, we can talk, hopefully at some point we'll talk about my view on the environment, because he's also slamming me on that. I hate puppies and kittens and all that kind of stuff, according to Mr. Inslee. On green jobs, I think we need to look very carefully at the amount of money that those green jobs cost and where that money's coming from. If you look, and there's a section in this briefing book that I've given you where I talk about that, if you look at the actual experience of green jobs, what you're going to find out is, first of all, that green jobs do not have an accepted definition, so they're recategorizing, financial analysts and accountants, and all those are now green jobs. Okay, so congratulations if you're one of those, you're now in a green job category. When you're talking about new green jobs, and you look at the experience that they've had in Europe, where they've had a bit of a head start on us, look at what they've produced in Europe. If you look at Mr. Inslee used to talk a lot a couple of years ago, he was talking about the German experience and the Spanish experience and creating green jobs and holding those up as a paragon of goodness in green job creation. Well, you know what happened in Spain? They found out that it cost 2 jobs in the private sector for every green job that they created. They had the full Megillah in terms of this. They had the feed-in tariffs, and they've got the cap and trade, and they've got all of that kind of stuff. And they discovered that it was too expensive. And so right now they have an 18% unemployment rate, and they have cut those subsidies by half or thereabouts. It just simply didn't work there. In Germany, it was a similar situation. In Germany, they've got a very advanced solar industry, and that's great. Everybody loves solar. But they were paying $240,000 a year in subsidies for those green jobs in Germany, and now they're having to cut those back because they can't afford them. I would argue that we need real jobs, not some sort of a job that has to be subsidized to the tune of several $100,000. We are training people in green jobs, and we're training them to caulk windows and install solar panels and all this kind of stuff, but unless those are economically viable jobs, they will not last. I did a sort of a business roundtable over on Bainbridge Island, probably would have been 2 months ago now. I had 5 businesses there at this meeting. 2 of those guys decided to retire because they didn't want to put any more of their own money into the business because the climate was so uncertain. Between the other 3 guys, and this is on Bainbridge Island, they've laid off 150 people. Those are people that work in restaurants. Those are people that work in construction, in retail. Those are 150 regular, normal jobs that everyday people do. And I don't see those 150 normal jobs being replaced by green jobs anytime soon. The federal government in the stimulus package, the $862 billion stimulus package, do you know how much the first district got of that? So we got something about $230 million-ish in that. And out of that, according to the government's website, we created just a little over 200 jobs. $1 million a job for the ones that we got created here in the first district. And we can do better than that. And just labeling something a green job doesn't make it good. We need real jobs, and we need to have real economic development. And it's not the government that creates jobs, and it's not the government that stimulates jobs. It's private businesses. It's enterprise. It's creating something that's going to have a long-lasting value and is going to create economic value. That's what's going to create jobs.
Well, is that not a part of the economic future of this district? And I guess that's what, obviously we've seen a lot of entrepreneurship and this high-tech stuff, a lot of that. And what I heard your opponent saying is that he's trying to harness some of that, these inventive people who live in Seattle, live in Kitsap County, and looking into things like solar manufacturing, thinking of that, I guess green industry.
Right. And, again, what I would tell you is that I'm very concerned about what's happening in the first district. Mr. Inslee's doing a lot of work with people in Seattle and Moses Lake and other places. I'm concerned in the first district. And there just are not that many new green jobs that have been created in the first district. And if you look at the technology that's coming on, while there is some private enterprise in that, and I love the entrepreneurs, and I love it when they risk their own money to do it, government has a horrible track record at promoting innovation. You look at the last 30 years or so of what the government has done, and I'm not seeing a whole lot of innovation that the government has harnessed and created and channeled. They are very bad at picking winners and losers. And I don't think that they're going to get better anytime soon.
The other thing, it sounded that, and again, I apologize for questioning this way, but I think it's fair because we had him on Monday.
Yeah.
The other thing
when do I get my questions of him?
Yeah. The other thing that was driving, it seems like that sense of what he's going after with this issue is that concern for the environment. And so here would be what he's saying is this influences energy policy and future energy use and things like that and protection. And so this is, I guess, how do you respond to how an emerging economy addresses those concerns as far as what the environmental protection should be?
Well, let me first talk about sort of where I am on the economy, because I get mischaracterized by Mr. Inslee on this all the time. Is, you know, I like to throw, you know, pop bottles out the window of my car or whatever.
Didn't hear that one.
No, that was a new one.
Yeah, you should come to some of these forums. They're pretty entertaining.
Okay.
I may have exaggerated on that one, just to be fair. But you know, I'm a normal Western Washington kind of guy. I have commuted on a bicycle and a motorcycle for 25 years because I thought that was the right thing to do. You know, my motorcycle gets 40, 50 miles a gallon, and I've done that rain and shine for 25 years on my bicycle. We bought a hybrid car before the gas prices spiked because I thought that was the right thing to do. You know, I recycle. We love the lifestyle that we have in the Northwest, and I want to preserve that. And what I want to do is I want to make sure we do it in a way that's actually going to work. And if you've read Mr. Inslee's book, which is Apollo's Fire, and I'm, you know, one of the 10 people in the state that's read it, I think. What you find out is that he is very enamored. He loves wind, he loves solar. He likes some of the other ones. He doesn't like natural gas. He doesn't like nuclear energy. He doesn't like any of these other kinds of things, but he loves those wind and so forth. And if you look at wind power, you look at solar power, the estimates are it's 10 or 20 years before these things are going to be at all viable, if ever. If ever. You know, you look at something like, there was just an article, I think it was in New York Times today or yesterday, talking about wind power. I think it was New York Times. And they were talking about the future of wind power and saying that even when it's perfected, it's not necessarily going to be a great power source because, you know what, the wind doesn't always blow. And even once it's fully perfected, we're still going to have base generation capacity to make up for when the wind doesn't blow. We're going to have ways to store the power and that sort of stuff. So we're always going to need some sort of auxiliary power. And you know, whether that's going to be coal or oil or whatever, I don't know, but that doesn't seem to fit into the discussion of wind power at all. And then solar power right now is becoming more efficient. It's becoming more economically viable as we scale up in that, or I should say as the Chinese scale up in that. But still, that's not something that's going to run the power grid. And I think what we need to do is our goal is to cut emissions. And we want to reduce CO2 and the other bad emissions out there. I think we need to do that as quickly as we can with existing technologies. We have a 100-year supply of natural gas in this country. We already have buses and cars and things that are running on natural gas, and we could achieve, I've seen estimates of 17% reduction in our emissions in a very short period of time by using more natural gas, replacing coal-fired power plants with natural gas. And just taking advantage of the technology that's out there today. Mr. Inslee is opposed to that. There's a whole new generation of clean nuclear technology. France right now is getting 80% of its energy from nuclear. 80%. Japan, where I grew up, the only country in the world that's been attacked with an atomic weapon, just put in 8 new nuclear plants in 2009. 8 of them. And these are the new modular kinds of things. They go in relatively quickly compared to the old style. They're very safe. They're the same kind of technology that the Navy uses, just, you know, around the block. And the Navy's safety record with that has been 100%, absolutely perfect. And that's what we're seeing in these new nuclear plants. And India's putting in plants, everybody's putting in plants, but the United States, we haven't put in a plant since 1970s. That's because of our regulatory environment. So I advocate pursuing technologies that are here that we know are going to work, and let's get an immediate reduction in the greenhouse gases if we're serious about addressing that problem. And I'm not saying don't invest in these other technologies, but I am saying let entrepreneurs lead the way. If you look at the experience we've had there, there's a company, for example, called the Bloom Box down in California. And they've created what's essentially a large power cell. It's running far more efficiently than general power generation. They're using it to power some of the Google campus.
Say the name of it again?
Bloom Box. Yeah, there's a citation in there.
Oh.
Where you can go. What's that?
Well, I've heard about it.
Yeah,
Sand, silicone sandwich.
Yeah, and it's fed with natural gas to do the catalyzation or so forth or whatever. But it's a really interesting technology. They did that with $400 billion of private capital. And I think that's a great model, and I think that's one we should pursue. But I am very, very skeptical that the United States government can pursue an industrial policy that's going to be as entrepreneurial as guys in Silicon Valley and as guys in Redmond and Kitsap County and Snohomish are going to be able to do. And I think that's a very fundamental shift between Mr. Inslee and I. But believe me, there's no less dedication to maintaining a clean environment.
You sound like that. T. Boone Pickens there for a second, touting natural gas.
Yeah.
He's a private individual, entrepreneur who was touting that, and then all of a sudden it fell off the wagon. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I
Was the
don't.
time not right, or?
Maybe the time wasn't right. I don't know. I don't know Mr. Pickens. I don't know what his policy was, so I can't tell you. I think maybe the national will wasn't there, but I think the national will is there today to make some significant changes.
From the way you're talking, that would have been the perfect example to your scenario,
Yeah.
private enterprise leading the way.
Yeah, and I don't know what his goal was. I'll have to look at that.
If you're elected, you probably go in at a time when a group of Republicans, we're going to shift the numbers. No one knows how many, but it's probably going to happen.
But we all believe it's going to be more than 40.
What's your mindset when you would go in there, and what do we do to move the country in a better way that's not the gridlock, fighting, arguing, yelling? I mean, how do you think that moves forward?
Well, and I actually talk about this a lot, and this gets back to that idea of good government, and good government in the first district. What people want are people that are going to be able to work together and craft something that's going to work for the country moving forward. And I think what we have now, what we had in this last Congress is a great example, where we had this hyper-partisan kind of a plan, and we saw program after program after program shoved through the Congress without the sort of discussion, without getting national consensus. All of these big bills that were passed against the will of the people. Majorities of people opposed the health care bill. Majorities of people opposed the stimulus, on, and yet they were passed over the objection of the folks, and I don't think you can do that, not successfully, and have a working, functioning democracy. So I think that we need to be very open and transparent about what we do. I think we need to focus on fundamental reforms to fix the government, because everybody recognizes that our government's broken. And I think there are things that we can agree on as a country with the majority of folks in the country saying, yeah, that makes sense. As an example, if you look at the tax code that we have right now, I would argue that the tax code stifles business, stifles hiring, and is responsible for a great deal of economic pain. It's 70,000 pages of a tax code, and they have special provisions for everybody from gas and oil companies to, who knows what. And I think we need a cleaner, simpler tax structure that's not impacted by lobbyists, not impacted by politicians looking for PAC donations or what have you. And that's something I think most Americans can agree on. And I think we can pursue stuff like that. I think that we can pursue a strategy that's going to empower individual Americans and get us back to the ideal of a government that is viewed as a positive. As you guys go out into the community and work on the paper and do stuff, how often do you see people that actually believe that the government is a positive influence in their lives? It used to be pretty common, but not so much now. Now people are, I think, more concerned about the government looking over their shoulder and kind of screwing things up, because that's the experience we've had over the last 5, 10, 15 years. And so I think what you're going to see is you're going to see guys like me going in that I'm a fairly bipartisan guy. I care about good government. I care about results. And I hope that there's going to be enough other people like that in Congress that we're going to be able to do that. But what I can tell you is that I'm not going to be voting with my party 99% of the time like Mr. Inslee does. I'm not going to be following that kind of party line platform. One of the things I talk about in this, when we're talking about the partisanship in Congress, Mr. Inslee is a hyper-partisan in D.C. He is out there. When he was in D.C. and they were having these squabbles between them, do you know what he's best known for from the Republicans? He's known for trying to shut off Vice President Cheney's light bill, and for trying to impeach Alberto Gonzales, for telling Dave Reichert, we're going to kick your backside in 2008, so I'm not going to co-sponsor a bill. He made a speech here in Washington, in Seattle, calling the people that disagree with his positions the forces of darkness. That's that kind of hyper-partisanship. You'll never hear me say something like that about people that might disagree with me.
If you were there, would you work to repeal the healthcare bill?
I think that the healthcare bill was a tremendous missed opportunity. I think the country was ready for real reform in healthcare when President Obama came in. And he had huge popularity, and I think that they could have had real reform. Instead, they passed the healthcare bill. There's a page in here. This is what they did. There's 150 new boards and agencies for healthcare that they created. When they came in and did this healthcare reform, they promised us that we were going to be able to keep our own doctors. We were going to be able to keep our own insurance. We were going to be able to pay, it was going to cost us less, and that the whole cost curve is going to come down. And, you know, of course, Nancy Pelosi said you have to pass it to find out what's in it. Well, we did, and now we know. And what's in it is not pretty. We found that it is actually going to increase the cost of the system overall. We found that we are going to not be able to keep our own insurance because insurance companies are dropping out right and left. The Medicare Advantage guys are dropping out. The Medicare actuary came out with a study just, it was I think on the 8th of this month, saying that the average Medicare Advantage customer is going to be paying $862 a year more because of the changes. We were promised that that kids were going to have better insurance, and instead we find out that there are companies all over the place are canceling the insurance for kids.
Now you called it a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
How?
What would real reform look like?
Well, I think what real reform would look like, and I assume that's what
You're
you're
gonna-
going
yeah.
to
We're all over that one.
Just cut to the chase.
Sorry.
So I think what real reform looks like to me is a system where you have real competition for healthcare. So I think where you have interstate competition for healthcare plans and where you open it up and let people buy the kind of insurance they want to buy. And if somebody wants to have a bare bones policy, then by all means let them have a bare bones policy. If they want a Cadillac policy, let them buy a Cadillac policy. But by having that interstate competition, I think you're going to drive the prices down. The second thing I think we need to have is individual ownership of those healthcare policies so that we can actively shop them and say this is what I want, this is what I don't want. I don't want my employer, if I had an employer, not a lot of pay as it turns out in running for Congress, but I don't want my employer having responsibility for my health care and having that held over me so I can't change jobs or what have you. I think that we need to have individual ownership and responsibility for health care. I think we need abusive lawsuit reform. And I think that we need to have a mechanism where we as consumers understand how much we're actually paying for our healthcare dollars. I gave an example the other day, and then of course Mr. Inslee twisted this around as well, but I took my son to the emergency room about a year ago during football season. Somebody had stepped on his stomach or back, but they thought he may have burst his spleen. And so we went to the emergency room and we got a bill for $1,700. Now, at the emergency room, I didn't know how much the tests were going to be. I had no idea, but $1,700 is the bill I got. Turns out my insurance company, when they paid him, it cost $400. You know, so what happens to that other $1,300? The uninsured guys are going to be stuck with that full $1,700 bill. You know, meanwhile, the guys with insurance are going to pay $400. We've got to have a much more transparent system there.
Wait, I just want to make sure I understand that. So the insurance company paid the other $1,300, or they had the negotiated rate?
They had the negotiated rates,
okay.
and so what you find is that they bill a tremendously inflated rate, and then they settle for the $400.
Okay.
And gosh, wouldn't it be a better place if everybody was just billed that $400?
Total agreement. I mean, I have certain feelings and frustrations with the insurance industry and how insurance works right now. Getting back to the missed opportunity, however, in today, the way things and laws are passed, legislation is voted on, is it possible to pass a simple bill anymore? I mean, how do you go into this Congress and get along with and convince everybody else around there to see your way without making, because in my opinion, what happened with this healthcare bill, there was a heck of a lot of concessions and compromises that had to happen for it to pass, and that complicated the whole issue. Otherwise, nothing would have happened. So how do you take a simple idea and ram it through?
Well, first of all, you don't ram it through. I mean, that's the whole problem with this, is they did ram it through. I think you have to work on it, and I think you probably have to pass a piece at a time. I think one of the problems we have in Congress right now is they keep passing these huge, massive bills. They're passing a 2,300-page bill here, a 2,700-page bill there. It was this health care bill, was it the health care or the stimulus, that they had a 400-page amendment that nobody had even read about before they passed it. It was hours before they voted on the final bill. And I think that we need to keep bills down to a reasonable size. I've talked about truth in budgeting and truth in spending legislation that I would like to pursue that would limit these bills to about 150 pages. Because I think once they get beyond 150 pages, it's pretty easy to get a lot of mischief in there, and it's pretty easy to not understand what's in it. And I think we owe it to the American people and constituents to have a straight up or down vote on something that's very clear and plain. And I don't think that we have to vote on something that's a popular change. I find it very difficult to believe that interstate competition for insurance companies, I don't think there's a whole lot of people who'd be opposed to making insurance companies actually compete, on a level playing field. But, then we would have something added onto it, totally extraneous and something that wouldn't get majority approval. And that's the kind of thing that I think that we can kind of prevent if you have sort of single focus bills.
Single focus bills.
Single focus
I'll
bills.
remember that term, I like it.
150 pages, and I think that we have to have them transparent. They should be on the internet for 72 hours before they voted on, so that the public has a chance to look at them, so there's nothing snuck through. I mean, if you look at the stuff that went through in the health care bill that shouldn't have been in there, and went through in the stimulus bill that shouldn't have been there, it is 2,300 pages of unintended consequences because nobody understands what's working. And it's just bad government. It is just bad government, and I think they, to a large degree, they tried to pull the fleece over the public's eyes, and that's what they did.
Should it be repealed, or is there a process to
with the
work on things?
Yeah, I think repeal and replace is going to be the cleanest thing. I find it very difficult to believe you're going to be able to fix a bill that's over 2,000 pages and be able to understand all the ramifications. I mean, Nancy Pelosi didn't understand the bill when it was being passed. She said we have to pass it to find out what's in it, and that's just ridiculous. And I think even today, nobody really understands the full ramifications of that bill. When you have just today the Secretary Sebelius. Sebelius. I'm sorry, I was thinking Diane Sebelius, who was a...
No problem.
But at any rate, Sebelius, was giving waivers to companies so that they can still offer insurance, people like McDonald's and so forth, because they didn't recognize that McDonald's was going to have to stop its insurance programs. They're offering waivers for people so they'll keep offering insurance to kids instead of pulling out of that market entirely because they didn't understand what was in that bill. Companies like 3M have now dropped all of their retirees. I mean, on and on and on. Boeing cost $150 million is what they're calculating. I mean, that's massive unintended consequences. We're running out of time.
Yeah, we've got a few more minutes. I guess the last one I was going to, when we got going on this, we were talking about some of the reform that you see as needed and some of the fundamentals that the government still would be involved in. I mean, obviously there is a need for some reform in healthcare and holding insurance companies accountable and some of that. So what are kind of the priorities that you still see, both in the Congress on where you guys should be still working and doing that overall, and then also what is the government responsible to provide for us?
Well, let me address that second one first. I think the government is responsible for creating a climate in the country, an environment that people can thrive. And I think that they're responsible for doing a very basic job of creating that environment and climate. I don't think they're responsible for making sure that I get up in the morning and brush my teeth and do all that kind of thing. I believe in limited government, free markets, and individual liberty, individual responsibility. So I believe that the government is there to facilitate the aspirations of its citizens. So that's the second part of that question. As far as priorities, I think that the first thing that this government has to do over the next 2 years is to get a handle on government spending. Right now, we are looking at an economic cliff of biblical proportions. It is ugly, the debt of the United States and where it's going. I don't know if you guys have been following tickers today, but the dollar is just dropping like a rock. The stock market isn't doing well. Gold is skyrocketing, and that's because the dollar is looking so bad. The Fed chairman was supposed to make a speech this morning that has the markets all riled up. Now, I haven't seen the results of that speech coming over here and seeing what happened, but they have been talking about simply inflating their way out of this. inflating their way out of it. And the world is awash in dollars now because they've been just printing and printing and printing. And that's why we've seen the dollar devaluing, and that's going to cause huge problems going forward. So we have to get a handle on spending. And it's like my dad told me, you live beyond your means today, you're going to live under your means tomorrow. And the fact is that for the United States, it's now tomorrow. And so I think that the federal government has a duty to the citizens, a duty to get a handle on spending. You know, the current Congress has increased discretionary spending over the last 2 years by over 20%. Over 20% in the last 2 years, and we've been in the middle of this economic catastrophe, and yet they've increased discretionary spending 20%. You know, how does that work? How is that responsible? You know, it just isn't.
Is the Fed banking system a problem?
The Fed itself? I think that we need to understand very clearly what the Fed is doing, and I fully support auditing the Fed and then figuring out what to do next. You know, Mr. Inslee signed on to support auditing the Fed and then voted against the bill when it came due. So I think that are we cut off at 4 o'clock?
We were getting close. We told you an hour, and so that's...
So when do I get Mr. Inslee to answer my questions? I mean, I've been answering his the whole time.
Well, we did our best to invite both of you, and we had scheduled that for Monday morning.
Okay. Well, if I could maybe just close on a couple of things.
Please,
that we have.
please. Yeah, let's do that. We'll get your last thing.
Mr. Inslee and I have now done, this would have been our third or fourth editorial board if we had both been able to be here at the same time. And in every other editorial board, they've asked him very specifically and explicitly, are you running for governor in 2012? Now, you guys, I'm sure, know that he has purchased the URLs for Inslee for governor, and he's been doing interviews before he started running for governor.
Steve's asked him before.
Yeah. Did you ask him this time on Monday?
We didn't have a chance.
I have asked.
Oh, I thought you said...
And what did he say?
He said I'm running for Congress now.
Yeah, and so that's what he told the Seattle Times. We met with them. Ryan Bluffin asked him specifically twice. One of the other people there at that board asked him again. He refused to deny he's running for governor and said, I'm only focused on November 2nd. I'm focused on November 2nd. And that's a problem, because the people in this district are going to give one of us a 2-year contract to represent them in Washington, D.C. And they cannot afford, this is going to be a very, very tough Congress, this next Congress. They cannot afford to have a part-time representative that cares more about raising money and running for governor than he does representing the people of the 1st District. And so I think that's something that Mr. Inslee needs to answer to, and I think it's something that I would hope you guys would take into consideration when you're making your decision on who to endorse. Second thing I would suggest is that, and you already mentioned this is going to be a very different Congress in terms of its makeup. I don't think that there are many people in the United States right now that would bet that the Democrats are going to retain the majority in the next Congress. Every day the numbers are looking better for Republicans. I saw things over the last couple of days are now looking at more than 60 seats as a possibility. And it's going to be a very different Congress that Mr. Inslee is going to be facing. And he has alienated the Republicans in Congress with the attacks on the Bush administration, with the attacks on Republicans in general, telling Dave Reichert what he told him and so forth. When he's in the minority, he is simply anonymous as a legislator, and we cannot afford an anonymous legislator. We need a legislator that's going to be able to work with the people in Congress in the middle and actually pass positive legislation that's going to affect the district in a positive way. And I think that if you endorse Mr. Inslee for this position going forward, you're endorsing somebody that's going to be running for governor, and you're going to be endorsing somebody that's going to be in a Congress that is likely going to be hostile to Mr. Inslee and his views. So not to put too fine a point on it.
Have you run for office before?
I've not. I've not. No, I've worked in business and I've worked in the government. I've never run for office. I thought that this time it was pretty important. I have the ability to take a year off of, take a year out of my career to do this. I thought it was important, so I thought I'd give it a shot. It's been a great experience. I'm having a huge amount of fun. I've met so many great people. Thousands and thousands of people that are just wonderful. A couple that are kind of cranky, but
there better be a couple.
But in my campaign, I started with nothing. The first meeting I had in my campaign was to talk to a guy in a coffee shop. Said, "Hey, I'm thinking about running for Congress. What do you think?" And he tried to talk me out of it. And now he's working very diligently for the campaign. We have over 500 volunteers in my campaign. Just regular folks that have come out that care about the country, that believe we need a change. 500 people. And these are not just people that, said, oh yes, I support you and I'll put up a yard sign. These are people that are making phone calls, that are doorbelling, doing literature drops. There's a Victory call center right here in Kitsap. We've got one in Linwood. There's one up in Everett. And people are working hard in this election. And when you look at these folks and you ask them questions about, where did you come from? What's your political background? Fewer than half of these guys have ever done anything political. Fewer than half have done anything political. And, I find that just amazing.
That's what we saw 2 years ago.
Absolutely amazing.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time.
Thank you, guys, and I appreciate you giving me a fair shake.